Abigail Turner pulled her burned hand out of her sleeve and held it up right there in the street in front of all of them, because she was done hiding it. 7 men had looked at that scar and walked away. The 8th was already turning, and the town council behind him had a new word for what she was now removed. But before the dust settled, a stranger stepped off the mountain road and stopped dead in front of her. If you love stories where the forgotten woman finally rises, subscribe, and stay with me to the very end. And tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? I want to see how far this story travels. The 8th man was named Elias Crane, and he could not look at her. He stood in the middle of Red Hollow's only street with his hat in his hands, and his eyes on the boards of the mercantile porch, and Abigail Turner understood, before he said a single word, that this was going to be the 7th time she watched a man decide she was too much trouble to marry. "Miss Turner," he started. "Say it plain," she said. "You've all learned to say it plain by now." That got a flinch out of him. Behind Crane on the porch, 3 members of the town council leaned against the rail like men watching a horse being sold. Josiah Feld, who ran the bank. Reverend Doyle, who ran the church, and most people reckoned the Reverend. And Harlan Boyd, who ran the land office, and most people reckoned everything else. Crane finally lifted his head. "It's the hand, Miss Turner. I won't lie to a lady. My mother, Your mother saw my hand and told you I'd curse your children," Abigail said. "That's number 4's excuse too. You could at least trade for a new one." Somebody in the small crowd laughed. It wasn't a kind laugh. "That ain't fair," Crane said, and now there was heat in it, because a man who's ashamed will reach for anger the way a drowning man reaches for anything at all. "I came out here honest. I came to look at you honest." "You came to look at my hand," she said. "You didn't look at me once." She lifted it then. She'd kept it tucked in her sleeve for 6 years, kept it turned away, kept it under a rag when she washed other people's clothes for 11 cents a load. 6 years of hiding a thing that everybody had already decided about anyway. So she lifted it into the flat white morning light and let all of Red Hollow have their look. The burn ran from her wrist up across the back of her hand and pulled 2 of her fingers into a slight permanent curl. It had happened when she was 21, dragging her father out of a barn fire, and the town had never once asked how she got it. They only ever counted what it cost her. "There," she said. "Now you've looked. You can go home and tell your mother you did your Christian duty." Elias Crane put his hat back on. He tipped it a small, miserable courtesy, and he walked to his horse, and he mounted, and he rode east out of Red Hollow, and he was the 7th man to do it, and Abigail stood in the dust and did not let one muscle in her face move. That was the part they hated most, that she wouldn't cry. "Well," said Harlan Boyd from the porch, and he came down the steps slow, the way a big man comes down when he wants you to watch him do it. "That's the last of 'em, then." "The last you arranged," Abigail said. "The last there is." Boyd stopped in front of her. He was a wide man gone soft in the middle with a gold watch chain and a way of smiling that never reached anything. "Miss Turner, I've done more for you than this town owed. 7 times I found a man willing to come look. 7 times. He shook his head, and it was almost gentle, and that was the cruelest thing about it. "A body can only do so much. I didn't ask you to find me a man, Mr. Boyd." "No," he agreed. "You asked to keep your father's land." And there it was. Abigail felt it drop into the pit of her cold, the way you feel a stone go into a well and wait too long to hear the bottom. "My father's land isn't part of this," she said. "Course it is." Boyd spread his hands, reasonable. "You're a woman alone, Miss Turner. 27 years old, no husband, no man on the deed. That's 40 acres of good bottom water sitting under the name of somebody who can't work, it can't pay the note on it, and now can't marry to secure it. The territory has laws about that. I don't make 'em. I just keep the office that files 'em." "I've made every payment," she said. "You've made most. I've made every payment. I have the receipts in my father's Bible." Boyd's smile held. "Then you won't mind bringing that Bible down to the land office, so we can look at those receipts together. Honest." He let the word sit. He'd learned it was her word, and he liked to give a person's own word back to them a little bent. Real honest. Reverend Doyle spoke up from the porch, soft and oily. It'd be a mercy, Abigail. A woman can't hold ground alone out here. The mercy is to let it go to someone who can keep it worked and to see you settled somewhere gentler. There's a Christian home for unfortunate women down in Bozeman that would— I am not, Abigail said, unfortunate. I am inconvenient. There's a difference, Reverend, and you know it because you preach on it every Sunday and then forget it by Monday. The porch went quiet. She had not planned to say it. She'd planned, as she planned every day, to keep her head down, and her hand tucked, and her mouth shut, and simply outlast them, because outlasting was the only power a woman like her had. But 6 years of tucking her hand and 7 men walking away had worn a hole through her somewhere, and something had finally come through it. Josiah Feld, the banker, cleared his throat. The note's due Friday. Miss Turner, $40. I'll tell you the same thing I've told you 3 quarters running. I don't have to carry it. I've been carrying it as a kindness. $40, Abigail said. $40. She made 11 cents a load. She could count without a slate what that meant. She could count that if she washed every stitch of cloth in Red Hollow between now and Friday, she would not have $40, and every person on that porch knew it too, and that was the whole point that had always been the whole point, and the marriages had never been about mercy at all. The marriages had been about getting a man's name onto her deed so that man could sell it to Harlan Boyd, and when no man would take her, when her burned hand made her too spoiled, even for that they'd simply move to the shorter road. You could have just told me, she said quietly. Years ago. You could have just told me you wanted the land. It would have been more honest than 7 men. Boyd's smile finally faintly cooled. The land was always the land, Miss Turner. The men were a courtesy. And that was when the second shadow fell across the street. Nobody heard the horse. That was the thing people said about him afterward over and over in the mercantile and the saloon, and across their fences. Nobody heard the horse. A big blood bay gelding shouldn't move quiet. But he'd come down the mountain road at a walk unhurried and stopped at the edge of the crowd, and it wasn't until his shadow reached across the dust and touched the toe of Abigail's shoe that anyone turned around. The man on the bay didn't dismount right away. He sat and he looked, and the look went slow around the whole street. The porch, the council, the crowd, the woman in the middle with her burned hand still bare in the light, and it was the kind of look that made men check their own hands to see what they were doing with them. He was 34, but the mountain had put 10 hard years on his face that had nothing to do with age. Dust to the knees, dark leather gone pale at the seams. A rifle scabbard empty, which meant the rifle was somewhere he could reach faster. He had the stillness of a man who had spent years in country, where moving at the wrong moment got you killed, and the town which had never once been silent for Abigail Turner went silent for him. He swung down. His boots hit the street. He looped the reins once over the rail without looking at it the way you do a thing your hands have done 10,000 times, and he walked not to the porch, not to Boyd, but to her. He stopped an arm's length away. He looked at her face. Only her face. Ma'am, he said, and he touched the brim of his hat. Abigail had watched 7 men refuse to look at anything but her hand. This one hadn't looked at it once. Do I know you? She said. No, ma'am. Then you'll forgive me if I don't much feel like being looked at today. I've had a good deal of it already this morning. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. The memory of where one would go. I reckon you have, he said. I heard the tale of it coming down the road. Then you heard how it ends. I heard how they figure it ends. He turned his head unhurried and looked at the porch for the first time, and Harlan Boyd, who was not a man, used to being made to wait, straightened off, nothing at all. Help you, stranger, Boyd called. Came in for supplies, the man said. Flour, coffee powder, salt. 200 pounds of feed. I'll pay in coin. He paused. That's my business in Red Hollow. Mercantile's right behind you, Boyd said, easing back into his ownership of the moment. Mr. Pike'll set you up fine. He will. the man agreed. He didn't move toward the mercantile. He looked back at Abigail. Only I couldn't help but overhear the rest of it. $40 owed on 40 acres by Friday. That the shape of it, the street held its breath. That's no concern of a stranger's, Boyd said, and the ease had gone out of him. Now a hair, just a hair. No, the man said. It ain't. He reached inside his coat. Half the crowd flinched. He came out not with a gun, but with a leather roll worn soft, and he unfolded it there in his palm, and inside were coins, gold, the real weight of it catching the light, and he counted with 2 fingers, and he did it slow enough that everyone could count along. There's 40, he said, and held it out. Not to Boyd, to Abigail. She did not take it. I don't know your name, she said. Caleb Morgan. I don't know you, Mr. Morgan. No, ma'am. And I don't take charity. It ain't charity, Caleb said. His hand didn't move. The coins didn't move. Charity's when a man gives you a thing so he can feel bigger than you after. This is a loan. You'll pay it back. I aim to collect. Collect how? And for the first time, the thing at the corner of his mouth finished itself and became almost a smile, a hard, dry mountain thing. Ain't worked that part out yet, he said. But I don't hand a woman $40 and walk off. So you've got 2 choices, Miss Turner. You take this and you keep your father's land. Or you don't, and you watch that fat man behind me file paper on it Friday morning, and I'll ride back up my mountain either way. But I'll tell you true. His voice dropped, and it was only for her now. I'd sleeve easier knowing you kept it. Abigail Turner had not cried when 7 men walked away. She had not cried when they called her a problem. She had held it all 6 years tucked away like her hand. She did not cry now either, but her jaw worked once hard, and she looked at the gold, and she looked at Harlan Boyd's face, and she watched something go out of that face, watched a plan he'd worked for 4 years, crack down the middle in front of the whole town, and she found that was worth more to her than pride. She took the coins. Boyd came down off the porch fast, then all the softness gone. Now hold on. Morgan, was it? You don't know the first thing about this situation. That woman owes back interest. There's paper, there's process. Then process it, Caleb said, not turning. Take her $40 down to your banker there and mark the note paid, and give her a receipt in her own hand. Do it now while the street's watching. Or explain to the street why $40 cash ain't good enough for a debt of $40. Josiah Feld looked at Boyd. Boyd looked at the crowd. The crowd looked back, and there is a moment in a small town when the thing everybody has agreed not to see becomes all at once a thing they cannot stop seeing. And Red Hollow was standing in that moment now, watching their bank and their land office and their reverend all get caught in the same bright light by a woman's bare scarred hand and a stranger's cold gold. Feld, Boyd said tightly. Write the receipt. They wrote it on the porch. Feld's pen scratched. Abigail stood beside Caleb Morgan and did not look at him, and said low, so only he could hear, You've made an enemy of that man for a woman you never met. Man like that, Caleb said just as low, was already my enemy. Just hadn't met me yet. Why? She said. Say it true. Why'd you do it? He was quiet a moment. Feld's pen scratched. You held your hand up, Caleb said. Whole town looking. 7 men gone. And you held it up anyhow. He looked at her, then full, and there was nothing soft in it, nothing pitying, and that was exactly why she could bear to have him look. I've watched strong men and hard men and men that called themselves brave, he said. I never once saw a thing braver than that. I stopped walking. That's all. First time in a long while a thing made me stop walking. Feld came down with the receipt. Abigail read every word of it twice. She folded it and put it inside her father's Bible, where the payment receipts already were, and she closed the book on it. And only then did she let out one long breath she felt like she'd been holding for 6 years. There's your land, Caleb said. Kept. There's my land, she agreed. Owed on. $40. To you. To me. I pay my debts, Mr. Morgan. I don't know how yet, but I do. I've never in my life not paid what I owed, which is more than half this town can say. and they'll be the first to tell you I'm the one that's ruined." She lifted her chin. "So you'll get your $40, every cent." "I believe you," he said. And he meant it, and she heard that he meant it, and it was such a strange and total thing to be believed after 6 years of being counted and doubted and managed, that Abigail Turner, who had not cried through any of it, felt her eyes go hot at last, and had to look away up the empty mountain road to keep it from anyone's satisfaction. Harlan Boyd was not finished. Men like Boyd are never finished. They only change the ground they fight on. He waited until Caleb Morgan had gone into the mercantile to see to his supplies, and then he crossed to Abigail with Reverend Doyle at his shoulder, and he pitched his voice for kindness in case the street was still listening. "Miss Turner, a word." "You've had a good many already, Mr. Boyd." "That man." Boyd nodded at the mercantile. "You don't know him. Nobody knows him. You know what they call him up in the Bitterroot, the ones that have dealt with him. I don't, and I suspect you're about to improve me." "They call him the Cold Man," Boyd said. "Lives alone up past the tree line where no Christian soul will go. Traps hunts don't come down but twice a year. Word is he was Army once, a scout. Word is there's men in the ground on account of what he scouted, and not all of them wearing the wrong color coat if you take my meaning." He let it hang. "A man don't choose to live where no one else will unless he's got a reason to want no witnesses. You've just made yourself beholden to a killer, Abigail, $40 beholden, and a man like that always comes to collect." For one bad moment it worked. She felt it go into her, the seed of it. What have you done? What did you just take from whom? Because she didn't know him. Boyd was right about that much. She didn't know the first thing about Caleb Morgan, except that he'd looked at her face. Then she looked at Harlan Boyd, at the gold watch chain over his soft belly and the smile that had arranged 7 marriages to steal her father's water, and she understood exactly what she was being told, and exactly why. "Mr. Boyd," she said, "this morning a man I'd never met paid my debt and asked nothing but that I keep my own land. And this morning a man I've known 6 years tried to take that same land by marrying me off like a heifer. And when that failed, he came to me in the street to tell me the first man's a monster." She tipped her head. "You'll forgive me if I've lost the knack of trusting your idea of who the dangerous men are." Doyle sucked in a breath. Boyd's face went a slow, ugly red. "You'll regret that mouth," Boyd said, very quiet now, the kindness gone entirely. "Land like your daddy's needs protecting. Fences fail, water goes bad, fires start." He smiled again, and this time it was the real thing under it at last. "Awful lot can happen to 40 acres held by a woman alone. I've been the one holding it back all these years, Miss Turner. You think on that. You think real hard on who's been protecting you from what." He tipped his hat mockery in the gesture, and walked away, and the threat sat in the street behind him, like a snake in the road. Abigail stood alone with her father's Bible against her chest. She did not let her face move. But her heart had begun a low, hard knocking, because she was not a fool, and she had heard the true thing under all of it. The marriages had failed, so the land would have to come the hard way now. Boyd had just told her so. He'd told her the fires would start. Behind her, the mercantile door opened. Caleb Morgan came out with a sack of flour on his shoulder, like it weighed nothing, and he took one look at her face, at whatever was in it that she thought she'd kept hidden, and he set the flour down on the porch boards and came to the top step and stopped. "He threatened you," Caleb said. It wasn't a question. "He warned me," Abigail said, "about you. Called you the Cold Man. Said there's men in the ground because of you." Something passed behind Caleb Morgan's eyes. Then quick there, and gone. A shadow of a shadow, and for the length of one heartbeat, Abigail saw that Boyd's poison had a grain of truth in it somewhere, that this quiet man had a thing in his past. He carried the way she carried her hand. "There are," Caleb said. He didn't dress it up. He didn't explain it away. He stood there on the mercantile steps in the flat summer light and told her the plain truth, and Abigail found she'd rather have that than any comfort. "Men in the ground," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "You want to tell me about them?" "No, ma'am, not today. Maybe not ever." He came down one step. But I'll tell you this much since you took my $40, and you've a right to know who you owe. I've killed men. In the war, and after it doing work, the army wanted done, and then pretended it never asked for. I'm not a good man the way your reverend means it. He paused. But I never once put a person in the ground that wasn't trying to put me or somebody weaker there first. That's the only clean thing I've got, Miss Turner, and I've kept it clean for 10 years. So Boyd's right that I've killed. He's wrong about the rest, and I expect he knows it, and I expect that's why he wanted you scared of me instead of him. Abigail looked at him a long moment. He said fires start, she said finally, on land held by a woman alone. He said it in about those words, just now. Caleb went very still. Did he? He said. He did. And Caleb Morgan looked past her down the street to where Harlan Boyd had gone, and the thing that came into his face then was not the cold at all. It was something worse. It was the still, focused, absolute attention of a man who has spent his whole life learning to find where a threat lives, and had just found where this one did. Miss Turner, he said, how far is your daddy's land from town? 2 miles north. Why? Because I don't much like the idea of you sleeping out there alone tonight, Caleb said. On land a fat man just told you was going to catch fire. He picked the flour back up. And I've got 200 pounds of feed to haul north anyhow. My road runs past yours. You don't know where my road runs? No, ma'am, Caleb agreed. But I reckon you're about to tell me. On account of you owe me $40, and a man's allowed to see the land his money's riding on. The corner of his mouth did its almost smile. I aim to collect Miss Turner. Told you that. Startin' with knowing my investment don't burn down its first night. And Abigail Turner rejected 7 times called a problem. Called removed threatened in the street. Not an hour passed, looked at this hard, quiet stranger who had stopped walking for the first time in years because of her. And she made the second choice that would change the whole shape of her life. Turner land, she said. 2 miles north past the split oak follow the creek. She hugged her father's Bible tighter the receipts and the debt and the whole ruined saved morning inside it. If you're fool enough to guard 40 acres you don't own from a fire that hasn't started for a woman you met an hour ago. I am, Caleb said. Then you'd best keep up, Abigail finished. I walk fast, and I don't ask for help, and I don't stop when I'm tired. My whole life the only thing that stayed is my own 2 feet. She stepped down into the street. Help's never stayed, Mr. Morgan. You'll pardon me if I don't slow down to see whether you do. Miss Turner, Caleb said, hefting his flour, falling in beside her, the big bay following at the reins without being led. I've followed harder trails than a woman who walks fast. He tipped his hat one more time to the whole watching silent town of Red Hollow at their backs. Reckon I'll manage. They walked north out of town together, the woman everyone had decided to erase, and the man the mountain had made cold, and every soul in Red Hollow watched them go, and not one of them said a word, because for the first time in 6 years, there was nothing left to say about Abigail Turner, that she hadn't just answered for herself in the street with her burned hand held up to the light. Behind them on the porch of the land office, Harlan Boyd watched the 2 figures shrink up the north road, and he took out his gold watch, and he looked at the time, and he smiled, and he went inside to write a letter. The note was paid, the land was kept. But Harlan Boyd had said the fires would start. And Harlan Boyd was a man who kept his word. The road north was quiet a long while, and Caleb Morgan let it stay that way because he had learned that a person who walks fast when they're hurting is asking to be left alone, and the only kindness in that moment was to give it to them. Abigail broke first. You don't talk much, she said. No, ma'am. Most men, you give them 2 miles of empty road, they'll fill it whether you want them to or not. My father used to say a quiet man is either wise or hiding something. Which did he figure I'd be? He never met you. He's been in the ground 4 years. She said it flat, the way she said everything that hurt, so it couldn't get a hold on her. Fever, not the fire. The fire was before that. Everybody figures the fire took him because it took my hand, but the fever's what took him. 2 different years. This town can't keep even that much straight about me." "The barn fire," Caleb said. "You went in after him." She stopped walking. She turned and looked at him, and there was something dangerous in her face now. The look of a woman who had been handled and pitied and understood at by too many people who wanted a thing from her. "Who told you that?" she said. "Nobody in that town knows how I got this hand because nobody ever asked. So who told you?" "Pike, the mercantile man." Caleb didn't flinch under the look. "While he was weighing my flour. I asked him one question. I asked him why a whole town would try to marry off a woman 7 times and then try to run her out. And he got quiet. And then he told me the one true thing, which was that you dragged your daddy out of a fire when you were 21 and burned your hand doing it, and the town's been treating you like the fire was your fault ever since." He paused. Pike didn't seem proud of it, for whatever that's worth. Abigail stared at him. "Pike told you that," she said slowly. "He did. Pike hasn't looked me in the eye in 6 years. "Well," Caleb said. "He looked me in the eye when he said it. Maybe it's easier to be honest to a stranger than to somebody you've already wronged. Most folks are cowards in exactly that particular way." He shifted the flour on his shoulder. "You want to keep walking, or you want to keep standing in the road deciding whether to trust me? Both are fine, but we're losing the cool part of the morning." She kept walking. But something had shifted, and they both felt it, and after a spell she said quieter, "I did go in after him. Everybody thinks the fire started in the hay, and I was fool enough to run in. That's not how it was. My father was already inside. He'd gone in to get the horses out. He got them out, every one. And then a beam came down and pinned his leg, and I could hear him, so I went in." She looked at her hand as she walked the curl of the 2 fingers. "I got him out. His leg healed crooked, but it healed. 3 years he walked on that crooked leg and never once said the fire was my fault." Her voice didn't break. It just got very careful. "He was the only one, in this whole country, the only one who never once said it was my fault. And then the fever took him and left me with a town full of people who did." Caleb walked a while before he answered. "Then he was a good man," he said. "And you got the good of him for 24 years, which is more than some. My father put me out at 9 to work another man's cattle, and I never once heard him say a soft word, so." He looked ahead up the road. "You're ahead of me there, Miss Turner, whatever else you've lost." She glanced at him sidelong. It was she realized the most he'd said at one time, and he'd spent it telling her something that cost him. "That why you went to war?" she asked. "Get away from him." "That's why I went to war," Caleb agreed. "And that's a longer road than the one we're on. Ask me again when I've known you longer than 2 hours." "I might not get the chance," Abigail said. "If Boyd burns me out tonight, our whole acquaintance is 1 morning long." And that put the both of them back in the shadow of the real thing. The thing the road had let them forget for a mile, and they walked the rest of the way to the split oak, in a silence that was different now, not empty, but braced. The Turner land, when it opened up past the split oak and along the creek, was better than Caleb had let himself expect. He didn't say so out loud, but his trapper's eye ran the length of it and did the arithmetic in about 4 seconds. And the arithmetic told him everything he needed to know about why Harlan Boyd had spent 4 years and 7 bridegrooms trying to get his soft hands on it. "That's a live creek," he said. "Year-round," Abigail said. "Comes down off the same range you live on. Never froze solid in my life, not even the bad winter. Every other spread within 10 miles goes dry by August and has to drive their stock to the river. Mine doesn't. So, in a dry year," Caleb said slowly, "every rancher in this valley is at the mercy of whoever holds this water." "Now you sound like my father." She let herself the ghost of something that wasn't quite a smile. "He used to say the man who holds the water holds the county. He said it to me the week before he died. He made me promise I'd never sell it no matter what they offered, no matter how bad it got, because the day a Turner sells this creek is the day this whole valley belongs to one man." She looked at Caleb. "You met that man this morning, in a gold watch chain, telling you he's been protecting me. And there it was, the whole shape of it laid out plain, and Caleb Morgan set down his sack of flour on the Turner porch, and understood at last that he had not stumbled into a small thing this morning. He had ridden down for coffee and powder, and walked into a war that had been going 4 years over the one thing every dry country killing in the history of the West had ever been about: water. "He can't marry it out from under you," Caleb said, working it aloud. "7 men proved that. Your hand scared him off, and I expect he's known that a while and used it. Every man he sent knowing they'd balk. So the marriages were never meant to work," Abigail finished. "I've had all morning to think it too. He sent them so the town would watch me get refused. So that when he moves against the land, everybody's already agreed I couldn't hold it. That I'm a problem. That it's a mercy." She said the word like it tasted foul. 7 public refusals. So that when my 40 acres end up, his not one soul in Red Hollow will think it's strange. They'll think it's the natural end of the sad story of the burned girl who couldn't get a husband. "That's a patient kind of evil," Caleb said. "He's a patient kind of man." "No," Caleb said. "He was. He's not patient anymore. You heard him same as me. He's done being patient, Miss Turner, because I just paid your note and cost him his slow road. That's why he's talking about fire in the daylight. He's out of quiet moves." He looked north, up toward his own mountain, then back at the valley, doing a different arithmetic now. "Which means whatever he does next, he does soon. Before you can find a lawyer, before word gets around, before that receipt in your daddy's Bible turns into a thing a court might look at." Abigail felt the cold go through her again. "Tonight," she said. "Maybe tonight. Maybe he waits a week to look innocent, but he can't wait long, and he can't wait quiet." Caleb turned a slow circle, reading the land the way another man reads a page. 1 well, 1 house, barns down that the barn that burned, what's left of it, fences half rotted on the north line, no dog, no hired man, and a creek worth a county. He stopped his circle facing her. "Miss Turner, I'll be plain since plain's what we've been. You cannot hold this place. Not tonight. Not against what's coming. Not alone." Her chin came up. He'd known it would. "Every man in that town's said some version of that to me for 6 years," she said. "You can't hold it alone. And every one of them meant so give it to me. So before you finish that thought, Mr. Morgan, you'd best decide real careful whether you're about to sound like the 8th man." And Caleb Morgan, the cold man, the man with the men in the ground, did a thing then that no man in Red Hollow had done in 6 years. He laughed. It was short and rough, and clearly out of practice, like a tool that hadn't been used in a long time. But it was real, and it broke across his hard face and made him for 1 second 34 years old instead of 100. "No, ma'am," he said. "I'm not going to tell you to give it to me. God's honest, I don't want it. I've got a cabin up a mountain, and I like it empty, and I like it mine, and the last thing on this earth I want is 40 acres and a valley full of trouble." He shook his head. "I'm telling you, you can't hold it alone because it's true, and you're the kind of woman a man ought to tell the truth to instead of what she wants to hear. There's a difference between you can't do this alone, meaning give it to me, and you can't do this alone, meaning so let me stand next to you. Boyd's been selling you the first one. I'm offering the second." He picked his flour back up. "Now, where do you keep your father's gun, and when's the last time it was cleaned?" Abigail Turner looked at this man for a long moment, and something in her chest that had been clenched shut for 6 years, unclenched just slightly, just enough to hurt. "Under the bed," she said, "and I clean it every Sunday. It's the only thing in this house that's never once let me down." "Then you and me," Caleb said, "are going to get along fine." They didn't get the whole afternoon. They got maybe 2 hours. 2 hours of Caleb walking the north fence line and swearing under his breath at the rot in the posts. 2 hours of Abigail hauling water and setting the old rifle out on the table and laying out every cartridge she had, which was 9, and them both pretending that 9 was going to be enough for whatever a man like Boyd could hire before the trouble came up the road. And it did not come as fire. It came as 3 riders, and they came slow and easy in the late afternoon light, and the man in the front had a badge. "Rider," Caleb said, coming off the fence line at a walk that looked casual and wasn't. He'd put himself between the road and the house before Abigail had even placed the sound of the hooves, and she noticed that and filed it away. 3. One's wearing tin. Sheriff Dunmore, Abigail said low, watching them come. He's Boyd's. Everybody knows it, and nobody's ever proved it. The other two, I don't know. You want the rifle in your hands or out of sight? Out of sight. If Dunmore sees me armed, he'll have a reason. She set it inside the door quick and stepped back out with her burned hand tucked in her sleeve. From old habit, then deliberately pulled it back out and let it hang bare. Caleb saw her do it. He didn't say anything, but something in his jaw eased like a man who'd bet on a horse and watched it break clean from the gate. Sheriff Dunmore drew up at the edge of the yard and did not get down. "Miss Turner," he said. He was a lean, gray, careful man, the kind who'd learned that the trick to being crooked was to always look tired about it, like the corruption was a weight he carried rather than a coat he wore. "Been a busy morning for you." "It has, Sheriff. What brings you 2 miles out of town at supper time?" "Complaint." Dunmore's eyes went to Caleb and stayed there taking his measure, and Caleb let himself be measured and gave nothing back. "This the mountain fella paid your note?" "This is Mr. Caleb Morgan," Abigail said. "He's a guest. What complaint, Sheriff?" "Mr. Boyd's filed that there's a question about the boundary line on your North 40. Says the original survey's in dispute. Says there's cause to think part of the ground you're claiming was never rightly your daddy's to begin with." Dunmore said it all in that tired, sorry voice like a man reading a sentence he didn't write. "I'm to inform you there's a survey party coming Thursday to walk the line. And that till the line's settled, you're not to work the north field, nor take water off the disputed section. Court order behind it by end of week," Boyd says. Abigail went white, not with fear. Caleb watched it happen and understood it was rage, the kind of rage that goes white instead of red, because it's too old and too deep to burn hot. "The line was surveyed in 1859, she said very quietly, "by the territorial office. My father had the papers. I have the papers. There's no dispute, Sheriff, and you know there's no dispute, and Boyd knows it, and this is the second thing he's tried today, and it's not even sundown." "I don't know anything, Miss Turner," Dunmore said, and for one flicker there was something almost like shame in his tired eyes. "I just carry the paper. That's the whole job most days, carrying other men's paper." He gathered his reins. "Survey party, Thursday. Don't work the north field. That's all I came to say." "And if I've got the 1859 survey in my hand," Abigail said, "in my father's name, stamped by the territory." Dunmore paused, and here was the moment, and Caleb saw it coming, the way he saw everything coming, and he watched the sheriff's tired face do a small, terrible thing. "Then I'd hold on to it real tight, Miss Turner," Dunmore said. "Papers have a way of going missing around a dispute, house fires, break-ins, careless clerks." He looked at her steady. "I'd keep it somewhere Boyd can't reach, and I wouldn't tell a living soul where. That's not the sheriff talking. That's a man who's watched this happen before." And then louder back to the flat official voice for the benefit of the two riders behind him, who were clearly Boyd's and clearly listening. "Surveys Thursday. Comply with the order. Good evening." He turned his horse, and that was the first crack, the first sign, small and terrible, that even Boyd's own crooked sheriff had a floor he didn't want to go below, and that Abigail Turner might have exactly one friend inside the enemy's house and not even know his name. But the two riders behind Dunmore didn't turn with him. "Sheriff said good evening," Caleb said. He hadn't moved from between the road and the house. He said it mild. "That means the visit's over, boys." The bigger of the two, a black-bearded man with a scar splitting one eyebrow, walked his horse forward 2 steps instead of back. "We heard the mountain man was cold," Blackbeard said, grinning. "Heard he killed folks up in the Bitterroot. You that fella?" he spat. "You don't look like much down here in the flat." "Walk your horse back, friend," Caleb said, still mild, still not moving. "Or what? And here Abigail saw it, saw the exact instant Caleb Morgan stopped being the quiet man who'd tipped his hat and become the other thing, the thing Boyd had warned her about the cold man, and the terrible part was how little it took. He didn't reach for a gun. He didn't raise his voice. His face just emptied, went flat and calm, and absolutely without fear, the way still water goes right before it drops off the edge of something. And Blackbeard, who was a bully, but not a fool, felt it and stopped his horse. Or nothing. Caleb said quietly, "I don't threaten a man. Threatening's for folks who aren't sure they'll do it. I'm just telling you the sheriff said good evening and you're still here. And I'd take that as a professional courtesy while it's still on the table, because in about 10 seconds I stop offering it." He didn't blink. 1. Blackbeard's hand twitched toward his belt. 2. Caleb said. "Riley," said the other rider tight. "Come on. Boyd said scare 'em not." 3. Caleb said. Blackbeard Riley hauled his horse around cursing, and both of them fell in after the sheriff, and they went up the road at a trot that was just barely not a run, and Caleb Morgan watched them until they were small, and only then did his face come back and Abigail let out the breath she'd been holding. "You'd have done it," she said. "Killed him, right there in my yard." "No, ma'am," Caleb said. "I'd have put him on the ground and taken his gun and sent him home walking. Big difference. But I needed him to believe I'd do the other thing, and a man can only believe that if it's a little bit true." He turned to her. "You all right?" "No," Abigail said honestly. "Boyd's tried 3 things today and it's not even dark. The marriage, then the fire threat, now the survey. He's throwing everything he's got all at once. That's not patience. That's—" She stopped because she'd just understood it, and it was worse than she'd thought. "That's panic. Something changed. Something made him need this land fast." "What's changed, Caleb? Why now all at once after 4 years of slow?" And that question hung in the yard between them as the light went long, and neither of them had the answer yet, and both of them felt the ground under it that there was a piece of this they couldn't see a reason behind Boyd's sudden hurry, and that not knowing it might be the thing that got them killed. They found part of the answer at supper. Abigail had almost nothing to feed a guest, and said so plainly, no apology in it, and Caleb said he'd eaten worse than nothing for longer than she'd been alive, and they made do with cornmeal and coffee and the last of a salt pork end. And while they ate, Caleb asked to see the 1859 survey, and Abigail hesitated. "Sheriff said not to tell a soul where it is." "Sheriff's right," Caleb agreed. "So don't tell me where it lives. Just let me look at it here once, and then put it back wherever that is without me watching. I want to see what Boyd's trying to make disappear." She waited. Then she got up, and she made him turn his chair to the wall, and she was gone a minute, and when she came back, she set an oilcloth packet on the table between the plates. Caleb wiped his hands and opened it careful. He read it slow. He was not a fast reader. Nobody had taught him young, but he was a thorough one, and he went down the survey line by line, and Abigail watched his face, and she saw the exact moment it stopped. "What?" she said. "This survey," Caleb said, "gives you the creek." "I know it gives me the creek. It's my creek." "No. Listen." He turned the paper so she could see, and put his blunt finger on a line of the old surveyor's copperplate. "It doesn't just give you the creek on your land. Read it. The survey names the Turner claim as holding the headwater rights. The whole creek. From where it comes off the mountain all the way down through the valley. Your daddy didn't just own the water on his 40 acres, Miss Turner. He owned the right to the flow. Every rancher downstream draws water by your leave, legally, on paper, in 1859. Abigail stared at the line. "I never knew that," she whispered. "I knew he said whoever holds the water holds the county, but I thought he meant it plain that in a dry year folks had come begging. I didn't know it was written. I didn't know it was a right." "It's written," Caleb said, "stamped by the territory, which means whoever holds this paper doesn't hold 40 acres. He set it down slow. "They hold the legal water rights to the entire valley. Every spread, every herd. Boyd doesn't want your land, Abigail. He never wanted your land. He wants this. One piece of paper that lets him charge every rancher in the county for water, or shut it off, or drive them out and buy them cheap when their stock dies of thirst. The room went very quiet. That's why he's in a hurry, Abigail said, and her voice had gone strange. Something changed. Caleb, the railroad. There's been talk of the railroad coming through a spur line for the cattle. If the railroad's actually coming, then this valley's about to be worth 10 times what it was, Caleb finished. And the man who controls the water controls all of it, and Boyd just found out the railroad's real, and now he needs this paper before you find out it's worth killing for. He looked at her across the table. Miss Turner, that survey in your hand is the most dangerous thing in this county, and you've been keeping it under your floor, treating it like an old deed. Abigail looked down at the oilcloth packet, at the innocent old paper, at the thing her father had made her promise to keep, and understood at last why he'd made her promise so hard, and why he'd looked so grave doing it, a dying man in a fever bed, making his daughter swear over and over never to sell the creek. He'd known. He'd known exactly what he was leaving her, and he'd known it might get her killed, and he'd left it to her anyway because there was no one else. And because he'd believed the one man in the world who'd never once said the fire was her fault, that she was strong enough to hold it. He knew, she said, and for the first time all day, her voice cracked right down the middle. My father knew what this was. He made me promise. He was so scared Caleb and I thought he was just fevered. I thought I've been carrying the most valuable thing in the county under my bed for 4 years, thinking it was sentiment. She pressed the back of her burned hand to her mouth. He trusted me with it. He trusted me. And I nearly gave up and sold to Boyd twice when the notes came due, and I didn't know I'd have been handing him the whole valley. But you didn't sell, Caleb said. You didn't. He said it hard to make it land. Whatever you almost did, you didn't do it. The paper's still yours. Your daddy trusted you and he wasn't wrong. Now. And he folded the survey back into its oilcloth and pushed it across the table to her. Put that back where it lives and don't tell me, and let's you and me figure out how one woman and one mountain man keep the most valuable piece of paper in Montana out of a rich man's fire. She took it. She stood. And that was when they heard the horse. One horse this time. Coming fast up the north road in the last of the light, not slow and easy like the sheriff, but flat out a horse being ridden by somebody scared, or somebody in a hurry, and Caleb was on his feet and had the rifle before Abigail had turned all the way around. Get in the back, he said. Take the paper, go out the back window if you hear shooting, and get to the creek, and follow it up my mountain, and don't stop. I'm not leaving you to Abigail. First time he'd used her Christian name. It stopped her. The paper matters more than either of us right now. If it's a fight, you run with the paper. That's not me protecting you. That's you protecting the whole valley. There's a difference, and you know it. Now go. She went, but she took her father's rifle's shells, all 9, and she pressed 5 into Caleb's hand as she passed, and she kept 4. And he understood from that she wasn't going far, and part of him, the cold part, the part that had survived 10 years by never once counting on another living soul, did something it hadn't done in a long time. It was glad not to be alone. The horse came into the yard, and a voice called out high and cracking and young. Miss Turner! Miss Turner! Don't shoot! It's Danny! It's Danny Pike! And Caleb in the doorway with the rifle held. Pike's boy, Abigail said, coming back fast from the rear of the house. From the mercantile. He's 14. Caleb, don't. I see him, Caleb said, and lowered the rifle a degree, not all the way. Come into the light, son. Slow. Hands where I can see him. The boy half fell off a lathered horse, and he was white as milk, and he'd been crying, and he was so out of breath he could barely get it out. My pa sent me, Danny gasped. He said, Miss Turner. He said I had to tell you. He said he owes you this much. Boyd's got men. Tonight. They're drinking at the saloon right now, and Boyd paid 'em, and my pa heard it through the wall. They're coming out here tonight. He gulped air. They're gonna burn you out, and they're gonna make it look like the drifters did it, and Boyd told 'em. The boy's voice broke completely. Boyd told him if the mountain man's here, don't leave him breathing. He said, "Nobody'll miss the cold man." He said, "Make it look like the cold man killed you, Miss Turner. And then the drifters killed him. And that way, it's a tragedy with no survivors." Caleb finished quietly, and no one left to hold the paper. He looked at Abigail, and the whole valley belongs to the grieving man who tried so hard to protect the poor burned girl. Abigail Turner stood in her father's house, holding the shells for his gun, and outside the light was almost gone, and somewhere 2 miles south, a rich man was buying her death by the drink, and she found that she was not afraid. She was done being afraid. 6 years of afraid had all burned off at once this long, terrible day, the way a fever finally breaks. "How many men?" she said to Danny. Five, I think. Maybe 6. I couldn't see all of them." "When?" "Pa said they'd wait till full dark. Said drunk men are braver in the dark." The boy was shaking. "Miss Turner, my pa said to say he's sorry, for all of it. For 6 years of it. He said he knows sorry don't count for nothing now, but he wanted you to hear it once before." Danny couldn't finish. "He sent me because he was too ashamed to come himself. He's a coward, my pa, but he didn't want you to burn not knowing somebody warned you." And there it was again, the second crack in the wall. Red Hollow had built around Abigail Turner. First, the sheriff, now Pike, the small, terrible evidence that the town that had erased her had never fully believed its own story, that shame had been sitting in those men the whole time, like a splinter working its way out. Abigail crossed the room and took the boy's shaking face in both her hands. Her whole hands, the burned one and the good one. And she felt him flinch at the scarred one, and then because he was 14 and scared and needed comfort, more than he needed to be a coward's son, lean into it. "You tell your father," she said, "that Abigail Turner said his sorry counts. You tell him it counted enough that he sent his boy across 2 miles of dark to save my life, and that's worth more than 6 years of him not looking at me. You tell him that." She held the boy's eyes. "And then you tell him to get his family inside tonight and lock the door and stay out of it because what's coming isn't his fight, and I won't have his sorry cost him his son. Now go home, Danny. Go the back way, along the creek, and you ride hard, and don't you look behind you." "But Miss Turner, there's 5 of them, and there's just you and—" "There's me," said Caleb Morgan from the doorway, checking the loads in the old rifle with hands that did not shake at all. "And I've been outnumbered 5 to 1 before, son, and I'm still here to be rude about it. Now do like the lady says, ride home." He looked at the boy, and something in his cold face gentled just a hair for the child's sake. "And Danny, you did a brave thing tonight, braver than most grown men in that town have done in 6 years. You remember that about yourself. Whatever else happens, you remember you were the one who rode." The boy went. They heard his horse fade south along the creek going hard, and then the yard was quiet, and the light was gone, and Abigail Turner and Caleb Morgan stood alone in her father's house, with 14 cartridges between them, and full dark coming down, and 5 paid men riding out from town to burn them both, and blame it on ghosts. Abigail loaded the rifle. Caleb checked the door and the shutters, and the one window at the back, and worked out in his head, silent and fast, the whole grim geometry of 1 house and 2 guns against 5 men with fire. "Caleb," Abigail said. "Ma'am." "This morning I owed you $40. She snapped the rifle closed. Her burned hand was steady on the stock, steadier than it had been on anything in 6 years. "By tonight, I might owe you my life. I don't much like dying in debt." Caleb Morgan looked at this woman rejected 7 times, called a problem called removed, warned and threatened, and marked for death before a single sundown, standing in her father's house, with her scarred hand steady on a gun, and her chin up, and no fear left in her at all. And he felt the last of the cold that had kept him alive and alone for 10 years, crack straight down the middle. "Miss Turner," he said, "you keep that paper safe, and you keep that gun steady, and you do exactly what I tell you when the shooting starts." He moved to the window and eased back the shutter a finger's width and looked out into the dark toward the south road, toward town, toward the first faint bloom of torchlight just now rising over the far rise. "And we'll call the debt square in the morning." Outside the torches came on one by one, strung out along the south road like a low line of stars fallen to earth. 5 of them, then 6, coming slow and certain up the 2 miles of dark toward the Turner land and the Turner Creek, and the piece of paper worth an entire valley. Caleb counted them twice to be sure. Then he eased the shutter closed and turned to Abigail, and there was no cold left in his face at all. Only the clear, calm, terrible focus of a man who had finally, after 10 years alone, found something worth not walking away from. 6, he said. Blow out the lamp. The lamp went out and the dark rushed in, and Abigail Turner learned in the space of one breath that Caleb Morgan became a different creature in the dark. Down low, he said, and his voice came from a place she hadn't seen him move to. Bullets travel flat. A man aiming at a house aims for where he thinks your chest is standing. So don't stand and don't be where he thinks. Get to the corner by the hearth, stone at your back. You can see both windows from there. She moved. She banged her hip on the table and bit down on the sound. Good, Caleb said, though she'd made noise. Now listen close, because I'm only saying this once and then it's happening. Those men out there are drunk and they're paid, and they think they're coming to burn out one woman. They do not know I'm what I am. That's the only thing we've got that Boyd told him about the cold man, but a drunk man never believes the story till it's got hold of his throat. So we let him keep not believing as long as we can. You don't fire till I fire. You understand? Not one shell. Because every second they think it's just you in here scared, they get careless. And careless is the only thing that keeps us alive tonight. And when you do fire, then you fire at anything holding a torch, Caleb said. Not the man, the torch. A man can't burn a house without fire in his hand, and a man with a burning brand is lit up like a church candle and can't see a thing past his own light. You shoot the fire, Abigail, every time. Let me worry about the men. She pressed her back to the cold stone of the hearth and put 4 shells in her lap and the rifle across her knees and found that her hands were steady. She had expected them not to be. 6 years of shaking whenever the town looked at her, and now with 6 armed men coming to kill her, her hands were the steadiest they'd been since the fire. Caleb, ma'am? If this goes bad, it's not gonna... If it goes bad, she said again harder. The paper's in the flour barrel. Bottom, wrapped in oilcloth in the flour. You said don't tell you where it lived, and I didn't. But if I'm dead, you'll need to know, so now you know. You get it out, and you get it to a federal judge, not a territory one. Boyd owns the territory ones. Federal. You understand me? There was a silence in the dark. I understand you, Caleb said, and something in his voice had changed, gone rough. But you're not going to be dead, so it's a waste of a good secret? Everybody I've ever trusted with a secret has... I'm not everybody, Caleb said. Now hush. They're coming into the yard. The torches had spread out. Abigail could see the light of them leaking around the edges of the shutters, orange and moving, and she could hear them now. Horses and men who'd been drinking and had stopped bothering to be quiet, and one voice louder than the rest, and she knew that voice. Riley. Blackbeard. The one Caleb had counted to 3 at that afternoon. Turner, Riley bawled from somewhere out in the dark yard. Abigail Turner. We know you're in there, girl. Come on out and this goes easy. A pause and a laugh, ugly and drunk. Easier anyhow. Abigail's hand tightened on the rifle. Caleb's hand touched her shoulder in the dark, once brief, not yet. She's got the mountain man in there. A different voice, nervier. Boyd said he'd be... Boyd said a lot of things. Riley again. I don't see no mountain man. I see a burnt-up spinster's shack that's about to be a bonfire. The torchlight swung. Last chance, Turner. Come out, and maybe we're gentlemen about it. Stay in there and we cook you like your daddy's barn. And Abigail heard herself, before she'd decided to speak, call out into the dark in a voice that did not shake. My daddy's barn didn't burn my hand, Riley. I burned it dragging him out alive. You want to come in here and find out what a woman'll do when she's already survived worse than you? Dead silence in the yard. Caleb's hand came back to her shoulder, and this time the squeeze meant something different, meant that was reckless, and that was magnificent, and God help me all at once. And she felt absurdly in the middle of the worst night of her life, a spark of pure, fierce joy at having finally said out loud in the dark what she'd swallowed for 6 years. Then Riley laughed, and it was a bad laugh, and he said, "Boys, light her up." And that was when Caleb Morgan fired. He didn't fire at a torch. He fired one shot, flat and enormous in the closed dark of the house, and out in the yard the loudest of the torches went out, not dropped, not thrown, but extinguished, because the man holding it had been hit in the arm, holding it, and had flung it away screaming. And the scream told every drunk man in that yard that the story about the cold man was true after all, and the whole careful drunk confidence of them came apart in a single second. "He's in there! He's real the mountain man's!" "Now," Caleb said to Abigail, and she came up off the stone and put the old rifle to the shutter gap and found a torch and fired, and the torch went out and a man cursed, and she worked the lever the way she'd practiced 10,000 times cleaning it on Sundays, and she fired again, and a second torch died. 2 torches gone. Then a third Caleb's gone before she'd even seen him aim. The yard which had been strung with fire went dark in patches, and dark was Caleb's country, and Abigail understood now why he'd wanted the lamp out, why he'd wanted them to shoot the fire. Every torch they killed blinded the men more, and every second the men couldn't see. Caleb could, and he moved along the inside wall of that house like something that had been born in the dark and only visited the daylight out of politeness. "They'll rush the door," he said close to her ear, already moving. "Drunk men, once they're scared, they either run or they rush, and Riley won't run. He can't go back to Boyd having run. So he'll rush. When the door comes, you keep on the windows. Don't turn for the door. The door's mine." Caleb. The window's Abigail. "Trust me one thing tonight and make it that." The door came. It came with a shoulder and a shout, and the old wood splitting, and 2 men were through it, into the dark of the house, and Abigail did the hardest thing she had ever done, which was to keep her rifle on the window and not turn to trust the black shape of the man she'd known for one single day, with her back and her life. She heard it rather than saw it. She heard a grunt and a wet, heavy sound, and a body hit the floor, and a second man's shout turn into something choked, and then a crash and a thud and a silence, and then Caleb's voice perfectly level out of the dark. "2 down, 1 breathing. Window, Abigail. They'll try the window now they've lost the door." She swung back to the window, and there was a face there, right there, a man climbing in over the sill with a knife in his teeth, like something out of a nightmare, and Abigail Turner did not scream and did not freeze. She reversed the rifle and drove the butt of it into that face, with everything 6 years of hauling water and washing other people's filth had built into her arms, and the face went away with a sound like a dropped melon, and the man fell backward out of the window into the dark, and she was already levering a fresh shell and swinging the muzzle back to cover the gap before he'd finished falling. "Clear!" she called, and her voice cracked with something that wasn't fear. It was the wild, ragged joy of a body doing exactly what it was built to do after years of being told it was good for nothing. "That's my girl," Caleb said from the dark, and neither of them had time to notice what he'd called her. Out in the yard, Riley was screaming at the men who were left. "Get up! There's 2 of them, that's all. 2 we're 6. Get up! Hollis, get off the—" A pause, and then Riley's voice changed, went from rage to something colder. "Boyd's not paying us to run. Boyd said don't leave the mountain man breathing, and by God I mean to earn it. Torch the back. The dry side. Smoke 'em out the front and shoot 'em when they run." "Back corner," Caleb said instantly. "That's the old burned side, the wood's driest there. He's not wrong. Abigail, the back window. Can you get an angle on the back corner?" "No, the hearth's between." "Then we've got a problem," Caleb said, and for the first time all night, there was something in his voice that wasn't total certainty, and that frightened Abigail more than all the shouting had, because she'd already learned that when the cold man sounded uncertain, the situation was very bad. "If he fires that back corner, we lose the house, and if we run out the front, they'll cut us down in the light of it, and if we stay, we burn." A beat. "How many shells you got left?" 2. "I've got 3. Silence, thinking fast. That's not enough to hold, and it's not enough to break out clean. So we don't do either." She heard him move, heard him doing something at the hearth, and then she understood he was reaching up the chimney, up into the dark of it. "Your daddy's house, the roof. That old lean-to slope on the north side off the back of the hearth wall. Can a body get out onto it from the loft?" "There's no loft. There's a crawl space, under the eave. I used to hide there when I was small, but Caleb, a grown man, can't." "A grown man can't. You can." He was back beside her, gripping her arm hard in the dark. "Listen to me and don't argue, we've got seconds. Riley's about to fire the back. When he does, every man out there watches the fire because fire pulls the eye-drunk men most of all. That's my window. I go out the front low and I take Riley in the dark while they're all looking at the pretty flames. But I can't do it if I'm worried about you, and you can't hold this house alone. So you go up in that crawl space with the paper and the rifle, and you do not come out, and you do not make a sound no matter what you hear. No matter what you hear, Abigail. You understand me. You're going out there alone, against four. Against four drunk men who can't see in the dark, which is the only place on this earth I've ever been at home." His grip tightened. "This is the thing I'm good at. The only thing. 10 years I've told myself the killing was the worst of me. Let it be the best of me tonight. Let it be for something." A pause, and his voice dropped, and it was just for her the way it had been in the street that morning. "You gave me something to walk toward, Abigail Turner. First time in 10 years. Don't you dare make me watch you burn. Now get up in that crawl space." "Tu, itamas amite." She went. She hated it, every inch of it, hauling herself up into the black, low crawl space under the eave with her father's Bible and the rifle and 2 shells. Hated the smell of dust and old smoke. Hated leaving him down there in the dark alone. But she went, because he'd asked her to trust him. One thing, and she'd already trusted him with 3, and because he was right. God help her, he was right, and she'd learned 6 years ago that being right and being able to bear it were 2 different things. She got small. She got quiet. She put her burned hand over her own mouth to keep herself silent. And below her, and outside, she heard the back wall catch fire. The light of it came up through the cracks in the floor orange and alive, and she heard the drunk men whooping at their own fire, and she heard Riley's voice rise up triumphant. "There it goes. Now watch the front boys watch it. They'll come out coughing and we'll—" And then Riley's voice stopped. It just stopped mid-word, and there was a sound Abigail would never in her life forget, a short, wet final sound, and then a different silence than any of the silences before it, and then a man screaming. That wasn't Riley screaming, where, I can't see him, I can't see he's—" and a shot wild into nothing, and then the running. She heard men running. She heard horses. She heard the pure animal panic of drunk men who had come to a burning to kill one woman and had found in the dark behind the fire the thing they'd been warned about and hadn't believed. And she heard them break and scatter and flee. And under it all, steady and terrible and calm, she heard nothing at all from Caleb Morgan, which meant Caleb Morgan was working, and she pressed her hand harder over her mouth and did not come out. The fire was spreading. She could feel the heat of it now through the floor of the crawl space, and smoke was starting to find her, and every instinct in her screamed to get down, get out, run. But he'd said, "No matter what you hear." And she understood. The fire was what you hear. The fire was the test of her trust, and she stayed coughing into her sleeve, eyes streaming until she heard the one thing she'd been listening for under all the rest. His voice. Below her. Calm. "Abigail, come down. It's done. Come down now, the house is going. Come to my voice." She came down into smoke and heat, and Caleb Morgan's hands finding her out of the murk, and he had her an arm around her, and he took her out the split front door, into the yard, where the cool night air hit her like a slap, and she gulped it and coughed and gulped it again. The yard was a horror in the firelight, and Caleb turned her face into his chest so she wouldn't have to look at all of it, and she let him, and that told her more about how bad it was than looking would have. "Riley," she managed, "won't burn anybody's house again." The others ran. 3 ran, 2 won't. His voice was flat and steady and empty in the way she'd seen his face go empty that afternoon. The cold man voice, but his arms around her were not empty at all. His arms were shaking just slightly, and Abigail understood that Caleb Morgan felt every single thing he did and simply refused to let it slow his hands while the doing needed doing. "And your daddy's house is gone, Abigail. I'm sorry. I couldn't stop the back from catching. I got you out. I couldn't get the house, too." Abigail Turner turns in the circle of his arm and watched her father's house burn. The house she'd been born in. The house she'd dragged her father into after the barn and nursed him in for 3 years on his crooked leg and buried the memory of him in every room of. The house she'd hidden her scarred hand in and washed other people's clothes in and kept the most valuable paper in Montana under the floor of. She watched it go up into the summer dark, every board of it, and she waited for the grief to take her legs. It didn't come. What came instead, rising up through the smoke and the loss and the horror of the yard, was something she had no name for at first, and then found the name for, and the name frightened her with its size. Freedom. "Let it burn," she heard herself say. Caleb looked at her. "That house was where I was the burned girl," Abigail said, and her voice was strange and clear and steady. "6 years I hid in it. 6 years I tucked my hand and kept my head down and let this town decide what I was, and I did it in that house in those rooms being small. Let it burn, Caleb. I've got the paper. I got you out, and you got me out, and the paper's in my hand." She held it up, the oilcloth packet snatched from the flour barrel streaked with ash, but whole. "Everything Boyd wanted to burn is standing right here in this yard alive, watching him fail. Let the house go. It was never the thing worth saving. I was." And Caleb Morgan looked at this woman standing in the light of her own burning home, holding the deed to a valley and refusing to grieve the walls that had made her small. And he felt the thing that had been cracking in him all day finally break clean through. And he understood with a certainty that scared him worse than any gunfight that he was never going to be able to walk away from Abigail Turner. That the walking away man he'd been for 10 years had died sometime today, somewhere between a scarred hand held up in the street and a woman who chose freedom over grief in the light of her own ruin. "No, ma'am," he said quietly. "You were never the thing that needed saving. I've known that since about 9 o'clock this morning." They stood together and let the house burn down to nothing. And when it was done, when it was just embers and the gray coming up in the east, Caleb Morgan finally said the thing he'd been turning over since the smoke cleared. "They'll come back. I know. Not tonight. Tonight they run home and Boyd learns his 5 drunk men met something they didn't expect. But he'll come back harder and smarter and legal, and next time it won't be torches. It'll be paper and a crooked judge and a survey that says this was never your land." He looked down at her. "You can't stay here, Abigail. There's no house to stay in and no safe ground to stand on. Boyd owns this valley and everybody in it, and the second you're alone he'll finish what tonight started." "Then what?" she said. "You tell me what, because I'm out of house and near out of shells, and the man who wants me dead owns the sheriff and the bank and the church and the whole flat bottom of this county. Where does a burned girl with a piece of paper go, Caleb, when the whole valley belongs to the man hunting her?" And Caleb Morgan looked up past the embers, past the yard, up the north road, where it climbed and disappeared into the dark bulk of the range against the graying sky. Up toward the tree line. Up toward the country where no Christian soul would go, where a cold man had lived alone for 10 years, precisely because no one could reach him there. "Up," he said, "where Boyd can't buy the ground and can't send a survey and can't reach you with paper or fire or 40 crooked men. Up my mountain, Abigail, to my cabin, where the only law is the one the mountain makes and the mountain's never once taken a bribe." Abigail Turner followed his gaze up into the dark high country, and a cold thread of fear ran through her that had nothing to do with Boyd, because she had heard the stories everyone had. The winter that came in July at that altitude, the men who went up the bitter route and never came down the country, that killed the strong and the careless without preference. And she understood that Caleb Morgan was not offering her safety. He was offering her a different war, one against the mountain itself. "I don't know how to live up there," she said. "I'd die up there. Folks die up there, Caleb folks who've done it their whole lives. "You'd die up there alone," Caleb agreed. "But you won't be alone." He held out his hand, his whole hand open in the gray dawn light to a woman whose own hand had made 7 men walk away. "I'll teach you. Everything I know, and I know all of it, 10 years of it. How to read the sky and lay a fire and take a deer and last a storm. I'll teach you to hold that mountain the way you held this house was never going to teach you. And when you're strong enough, when you can stand on that mountain on your own 2 feet and not need me, nor Boyd, nor any man alive, then we come back down here with that paper and a federal judge, and we take this valley back in the light of day, where the whole town can watch, and there won't be one blessed thing Harlan Boyd can do about it." Abigail looked at his open hand. She thought about her father dying, making her promise never to sell the creek. She thought about 7 men who'd walked away from that same hand she now had to decide whether to place in his. She thought about the town that had called her a problem, and the house burning behind her that had made her small, and the mountain ahead that would either make her strong or kill her. And Abigail Turner, who had not asked for help in 6 years, who had let help walk away every time, because help never stayed, reached out with her burned hand, the scarred one, the one that had made her untouchable, and put it into Caleb Morgan's open palm. He closed his fingers around the scar without a flicker, held it like it was the most ordinary thing in the world, like a hand was a hand. "Then teach me," she said. "Teach me to hold the mountain. And then, Mr. Morgan, you and I are going to come back down here and ruin Harlan Boyd in front of God and the whole of Red Hollow." Her fingers tightened on his. "I pay my debts. I told you that this morning. Well, I owe this town 6 years, and I owe Boyd a burned house, and I always pay in full." Caleb Morgan looked at their 2 joined hands in the gray light. The trapper's scarred grip, and the burned one. And for the first time in 10 years, on the ashes of another life ending, and the edge of a mountain that killed the unready, the cold man smiled like he meant it. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I reckon we are." And as the sun came up red over the burned house and the ruined yard and the 2 figures turning north toward the high country, neither of them saw the single rider sitting his horse far back on the south road, watching one of the 3 who'd run, circled back on Boyd's orders to see who'd lived and who'd died. He watched the mountain man and the burned woman take the north road up toward the tree line, hand in hand, alive with the paper. And he turned his horse south toward town, toward Boyd, to tell him the burned girl and the cold man were still breathing and had run up the one mountain in the territory where no posse Boyd could buy would ever be able to follow them. He rode hard. He had a great deal to report. The mountain took 3 days to try to kill her, and Caleb Morgan led it because he had learned that a person only believes the mountain when it puts its hands around their throat. "You're doing it wrong," he said on the first morning watching her lay a fire. "I've laid 1,000 fires. You've laid 1,000 fires in a valley. Down there air's thick and it wants to burn. Up here it's thin and it fights you. You build it like that, it smokes and dies and you freeze." He crouched beside her and took the wood out of her hands, and he did it different, and it caught first try. Small to big, air underneath. Always leave the mountain a way to breathe or it won't give you fire. Up here everything's a trade. The mountain gives you nothing free. Abigail watched the little flame take, and something in her jaw set. "Show me again," she said, slower. And that was the thing Caleb Morgan learned about Abigail Turner in the first 3 days. The thing that undid 10 years of him. She never once said, "I can't." She got things wrong, badly wrong, dangerously wrong. And every single time she said the same 2 words, "Show me." Not help me, not do it for me, show me. And then she did it herself, over and over with her burned hand that wouldn't fully close until she'd beaten it. By the 4th day, she could lay a mountain fire. By the 6th, she could dress a rabbit he'd trapped without turning her face away. By the 9th, she could find her way from the cabin down to the creek and back in the dark, which he made her practice, until she could do it, because he said, "The day it matters, you won't have a lamp. And the day it matters is always the day you didn't practice for." And every night in the one-room cabin with the fire between them, they talked. Not about the valley, not about Boyd. About smaller things, truer things The kind of things two people say in the dark when the day's work has worn the armor off them. "You never told me about the men in the ground," Abigail said on the 10th night. "You said ask you when you'd known me longer than 2 hours. It's been 10 days. Caleb was quiet a long while. The fire popped. "There was a valley," he said finally. "Down in the nations, after the war. The army had me and some others doing work they didn't put on paper. Moving folks off land the government had promised them and then wanted back." He stared into the fire. "There was a family. Wouldn't move. Had papers said the land was theirs. Real papers, government papers from before. And my captain, he said the papers didn't matter, said burn 'em out, and I—" His jaw worked. "I was 24. I did what I was told. And I watched a man hold up a piece of paper that said he had a right to his own home. And I watched my captain take it out of his hand and put it in the fire, and then I watched what came after, and it was the worst thing I ever saw a man do, and I helped do it." Abigail didn't move, didn't speak, just listened the way he'd listened to her about the barn. "The men in the ground," Caleb said. "Some of 'em wore the wrong coat in the war and I don't lose sleep. But my captain's in the ground too. I put him there. 2 years after, when I found out the land he burned that family off of got sold to a company he had shares in. The whole thing was a swindle start to finish, and the paper that man held up was real. And my captain burned it, because a real paper's the only thing that can stop a rich man's swindle, and I helped him do it before I understood." He looked up, and his eyes found her in the firelight. "So when I rode down that mountain and saw a fat man in a gold watch chain trying to make a woman's papers disappear so he could steal a valley, and saw that woman hold up her burned hand to a whole town that had decided she was nothing—" "You stopped walking," Abigail whispered. "I stopped walking," Caleb said, "because I've spent 10 years up this mountain telling myself I couldn't undo the thing I did down in the nations. And then there you were, Abigail. The same thing happening again right in front of me, only this time I was on the right side of the fire before it got lit." His voice was rough as gravel. "You want to know why a stranger paid your debt for nothing? That's why. You weren't nothing to me. You were the second chance I stopped believing God gave people." Abigail Turner crossed the cabin floor in the firelight and knelt down in front of him and took his hard, scarred hands in both of hers, the burned one and the whole one, and she held them the way he'd held hers on the ashes of her house, like a hand was a hand. "Then we'll save this one," she said. "The paper, the family, all of it. This time it doesn't burn. This time the man in the gold watch chain is the one who ends up with nothing." She held his eyes. "You didn't fail that family, Caleb. You were 24 and taking orders, and you didn't know. A boy who does a wrong thing not knowing is not the same as a man who does it knowing. Harlan Boyd knows. That's the difference between you and him, and it's the whole difference. And don't you let anybody, including yourself, ever tell you it's not." And Caleb Morgan, who had carried the nations for 10 years alone up a mountain, felt it get lighter, not gone, never gone, but lighter shared. And he looked at this woman kneeling in front of him, holding his ruined hands. And he did the thing he'd wanted to do since a scarred hand went up in the street outside a mercantile. He kissed her. She kissed him back. And it wasn't rescue, and it wasn't pity, and it wasn't the desperate clutch of two people afraid to die. It was two survivors recognizing each other across a fire. Two people the world had thrown away, finding out they'd been thrown to the same place for a reason. It was equal. It was the first thing in Abigail Turner's whole life that had felt exactly perfectly equal. "I owed you $40, she said against his mouth, and she was almost laughing and almost crying. "This is a poor way to keep track of a debt, Mr. Morgan." "Call it interest," Caleb said, and kissed her again. They had 11 days. 11 days of the mountain in high summer, the good weeks. The weeks that made men forget the mountain was ever anything but green and generous. 11 days of her getting stronger and him getting warmer, of a woman learning to hold high country and a man learning to hold another human being. And if the story were a kinder one, it would have given them the summer. The story was not a kinder one. On the 12th day, the sky did the thing Caleb had been watching for and dreading, and he came into the cabin fast with an armload of wood and his face gone to stone. "Storm coming?" "It's July," Doesn't matter. Not up here. I've seen snow in July at this altitude 3 times in 10 years, and every time it came, just like this, too warm, too still, the birds gone quiet, that green color to the west. Mamshi. He was already moving fast, purposeful. This is a bad one, Abigail. I can feel it in my back teeth. We've got maybe 6 hours, and then the mountain's going to try to kill us both, and this time I can't teach you around it. This time we just survive it. Everything I've shown you, all 11 days of it, this is what it was for. This right here. They readied the cabin. Wood stacked to the ceiling inside. Water in every vessel they had. The animals his horse the mule brought into the lean-to and walled off from the wind. And Abigail worked beside him, fast and silent and unafraid, and he watched her out of the corner of his eye and thought, she'll do. God help us both, she'll do. The storm came at dusk, and it came like the end of the world. It came screaming down off the peaks, and the temperature dropped 40 degrees in an hour, and the summer green vanished under white, and the wind hit the cabin like a living thing, trying to get in. And inside Caleb and Abigail fed the fire, and held the line, and did not sleep. Because you did not sleep in a storm like this. Sleep in a storm like this was how they found you in the spring. And near midnight, at the worst of it, they heard something under the wind. An animal, Abigail thought first, then not an animal. A voice. That's a man, she said. Caleb, there's a man out there. There can't be. But he was already at the door, already listening. Nobody comes up this mountain, nobody but a fool would be out in. And then his face changed because he'd heard it too, and worse, he'd understood it. Somebody followed us up. Somebody's been on the mountain and got caught in the storm. The voice came again, closer, weaker, and it was calling a word, and the word was, Turner, Miss Turner. Abigail went white. That's Boyd's man, Caleb said grimly. One of the 3 that ran. Boyd sent somebody up after us and the storm caught him, and now he's dying out there in it. He turned from the door, and there was a war on his face Abigail had never seen there before the cold man, and something else fighting it out in real time. He came up here to kill you, Abigail. Or to find you so Boyd could. That man is dying his death fair out there in weather that don't care whose side anybody's on. And every rule of this mountain says you let him die because you do not open that door in a storm like this. You do not let the storm in to save one enemy. You'll kill us both to save one man who came to murder you. Abigail Turner looked at the door. She thought about 7 men who'd walked away from her. She thought about a whole town that had decided to let her starve. She thought about how easy it was, how natural, how justified to decide a person wasn't worth saving. Open it, she said. Abigail. Open the door, Caleb. Her voice shook, but not with fear. This whole thing, everything Boyd is everything that town is. It's people deciding some other people aren't worth saving. That's the whole sickness of it. That a burned hand, or an empty purse, or being on the wrong side makes a person into a thing you can let die. She was already pulling on her coat, already reaching for the rope by the door that he'd taught her was for exactly this. If I let that man die out there to save myself, then Boyd's right about the world. Then it really is just about who's worth keeping. And I would rather freeze on this mountain being wrong about that than live in that man's world being right. She looked at him. You stopped walking for me when the whole town said don't. Now I'm asking you to open a door when the whole mountain says don't. Same thing, Caleb. It's the exact same thing, and you know it. And Caleb Morgan, the cold man who knew better, who knew to a certainty that this was how the mountain killed the soft-hearted, looked at this woman who had just described the exact wound in his own soul, the nations, the family, the paper in the fire, the deciding that some folks weren't worth saving. And he tied the rope around her waist and his own, and he took up the lantern, and he said, "Stay roped to me. If I go down, you do not let go, and you do not come after you haul. You understand? You haul me in like a fish, and you do not think about it." And he opened the door onto the screaming white. They found the man 40 feet from the cabin, down already half buried. And it was Hollis, the nervy one, the one who'd said, Boyd said scare 'em not, and he was near dead. Blue-lipped, his hands frozen into claws, and Caleb got him over a shoulder, and they hauled back along the rope, hand over hand, through wind that tried to peel them off the mountain. And they got the door shut behind them, all three, and the storm stayed outside where it belonged. They worked over Hollis for an hour. Warmed him slow, the way you had to, too fast, would stop his heart. And somewhere in the second hour, his eyes came open, and he looked up at the two faces of the people he'd come to kill, and he began weakly to weep. "You should have let me die," he croaked. I came up here to Boyd sent me to find where you'd hold up so he could send men in the spring. You should have let me die out there. I'd have let you." "I know you would," Abigail said, spooning warm broth past his cracked lips. "That's the difference between us, Mr. Hollis. And now you know it too. Now you'll carry it the rest of your life that the burned girl and the cold man pulled you out of a storm you came up to murder them in. You'll carry that." She held his frozen, ruined hands in her burned one. "I hope it changes you. But even if it doesn't, I'd do it again, and that's the whole point of it." Hollis wept harder and turned his face away, and something in the man broke that night that never went back together the same way. And though none of them knew it yet, that broken thing was going to matter, was going to be a witness, was going to be the crack in Boyd's own house that brought the whole house down. The storm blew 3 days. On the third day it broke, and the mountain lay white and brilliant and murderous beautiful under a hard blue sky, and Caleb went out to check the animals and the trap line and to see what the storm had left them. He didn't come back. An hour. 2. Abigail tending Hollis, watching the light, feeling the old cold fear come up her spine. 3 hours. And no Caleb. And the light starting to go long, and every single thing he'd ever taught her about the mountain screaming that something was wrong. Because Caleb Morgan did not lose track of the light. Caleb Morgan was never late. The whole of Caleb Morgan was a man who came back. She went out after him. She followed his tracks in the fresh snow, roped and provisioned exactly the way he'd taught her, moving exactly the way he'd taught her, and she found his trail going up toward the high trap line, and she found where it went along the top of a ravine, and she found where the storm-loosened snow had given way under him. She found the edge and the broken lip of it, and she looked down. He was at the bottom of the ravine, 30 feet down, and he was not moving, and there was blood on the snow around his leg, dark and wide, and Abigail Turner stood on the edge of the drop that had taken the strongest man she'd ever known, and understood that the mountain had finally, on its own terms in its own time, done the thing everyone had always said it would do. It had taken Caleb Morgan, and left her alone. "Caleb!" She screamed down into the ravine, and the sound of it vanished into all that white. "Caleb!" Nothing. No movement. The blood spreading. And Abigail Turner stood at the top of that ravine, one woman alone on a killing mountain with an injured enemy in the cabin behind her, and the only man who'd ever chosen her broken and bleeding and maybe already dead 30 feet below, and everything the town of Red Hollow had ever said about her rose up in that moment to be answered. "A woman can't hold ground alone out here. You can't do this alone. She's a problem waiting to starve." Abigail looked down at Caleb Morgan's still body in the red snow, and she started hand over hand, rope over rope, exactly the way he'd taught her down into the ravine to get him, because she was done forever letting anyone she loved be a person the world got to decide wasn't worth saving. "I'm coming," she said to the man who'd taught her how. "You hold on, Caleb Morgan. You hold on. I did not climb this whole mountain to lose you at the bottom of it." And she went down into the dark of the ravine alone to prove the whole world wrong. She reached the bottom of the ravine with her burned hand raw and bleeding through her glove, and she got to Caleb Morgan, and she pressed 2 fingers to his throat the way he'd taught her to check a downed animal, and she found a pulse. Weak, slow, but there. "You're alive," she said, and her voice broke on it. "You stubborn mountain, you're alive." His leg was broken. She could see that without touching it, the wrong angle of it below the knee, the bone not through the skin, but close, and the blood was from a gash along his thigh where he'd caught rock coming down. She'd watched him set a rabbit snare and dress a deer and read the sky, but he had never once taught her how to carry a 200-pound man with a broken leg up 30 feet of ice, because there was no way to teach it because it could not be done. So she did the thing that could not be done. She would tell it plain afterward for the rest of her life. Whenever anyone asked how she got him out of that ravine, she would say, "I don't rightly know. I stopped being a person who knew what was possible." She rigged the rope the way he'd shown her for hauling a carcass, doubled it, ran it around a spur of rock to take the weight, and she got him into a cradle of it, and she climbed and she hauled and she slid back and she hauled again, and her burned hand screamed and her whole body screamed, and the light went long and then longer, and she hauled Caleb Morgan up out of that ravine one brutal foot at a time, talking to him the whole way, because talking to him was the only thing keeping her own heart in her chest. "You do not get to leave," she told him, hauling. "You do not get to be the eighth man. 7 walked away, and you're the one that stopped, and you do not get to change your mind now by dying. Caleb Morgan, I won't have it. I will haul you up this mountain, and I will set your leg, and I will keep you alive out of pure spite if I have to." Tiu. And near the top, at the worst of it, when her arms had gone past pain into a numb far country, and the rope was slipping in her ruined hand, Caleb's eyes came open. Just barely. Just slits, but open. "Abigail," he breathed. "Don't talk. Save it. I've almost got you. You're—" His cracked lips worked. "You came down, into the ravine, alone. I told you I don't leave people to be decided about," she gritted and gave the rope another haul. "You're a person. I decided you're worth it. Now shut up and help me by not dying." And Caleb Morgan, broken at the bottom of a mountain he'd owned for 10 years, looked up at this woman, hauling him out of his own grave with a burned hand. And he began weakly to laugh, the second real laugh she'd ever heard from him. And it turned into a cough, and the cough into a groan as the movement jarred his leg, but the laugh had been real. "Yes, ma'am," he whispered. "Not dying. I'll put it on the list." She got him up. God knows how, but she got him over the lip and onto the flat, and then she got him back to the cabin, half dragging the last quarter-mile in full dark by feel and memory, because he'd made her practice the way home in the dark until she could do it, and she'd cursed him for it at the time, and now it saved both their lives. Hollis was waiting, recovered enough to stand, and when he saw them come through the door, the woman he'd been sent to kill, dragging the man he'd been sent to help kill both of them, half frozen and bloody. Something finished breaking in Hollis that had started breaking 3 nights before. "Tell me what to do," Hollis said. "Miss Turner, tell me what to do and I'll do it. I owe you a life. Let me start paying it." Between the two of them, they set Caleb's leg. Abigail did the setting because her hands were surer, because 11 days of show me had made her hands sure, and Caleb bit down on a folded strap and did not scream, and when the bone was straight and splinted, he passed out, and Abigail sat back on her heels, covered in his blood and her own, and shook for a full minute before she made herself stop. Then she stood up. "He'll live," she said to Hollis, and to herself and to the mountain. "He'll live. Now." She looked at the broken enemy who'd offered to pay back a life. "Mr. Hollis, you came up this mountain to find where we were hiding so Boyd could send men in the spring." "I did." He couldn't meet her eyes. "How much does Boyd know right now? What have you already told him?" "Nothing. I never got word down. The storm caught me before I could." Hollis swallowed. "As far as Boyd knows, he sent 3 men after you and none came back. He doesn't know if you're alive or dead. He doesn't know where you are. He's waiting on me to tell him, and I never will." And Abigail Turner, standing over the unconscious body of the man she loved, with the deed to a valley and a flour sack and a broken enemy turned witness at her side, felt the whole shape of the thing turn over in her mind and come up for the first time in her favor. "Then Boyd's blind," she said slowly. "He's down in that valley right now not knowing whether we're alive, not knowing we have the paper, not knowing—" She looked at Hollis, "that he's got a man who watched him order 5 murders and is willing to say so to a judge." Hollis went still. "You'd testify," Abigail said. It wasn't quite a question. "Miss Turner." Hollis's voice shook. "I've done bad things. I rode with bad men because it was money, and I was hungry, and I told myself somebody else was giving the orders." "That's the same lie your Caleb told himself in the Nations, ain't it?" I heard you two talking the fever nights. I wasn't as out as you thought. Yes, boom, timambi. He wiped his face. You pulled me out of a storm I came up to help murder you in. Nobody in my whole life ever did a thing like that for me, so yes, ma'am, I'll testify. I'll stand in front of a federal judge, and I'll tell him Harlan Boyd paid 5 men to burn you out and make it look like drifters, and told us to leave the cold man dead. And I'll say it knowing it might hang me too, because I would rather hang telling the truth than live one more year being the man I was when I rode up this mountain. It took Caleb 6 weeks to walk. 6 weeks of high summer bleeding into the first cold of Abigail running the cabin and the trap line and the whole mountain nearly alone of her becoming, without ever deciding to the thing the town of Red Hollow had sworn a woman like her could never be capable whole enough. Caleb watched her from his splinted bed and his crutch, and then his cane, and he watched her hold his mountain the way he'd promised to teach her. And somewhere in those 6 weeks, he stopped teaching her anything at all because there was nothing left she needed shown. You don't need me anymore, he said one evening, testing it, watching her face. You could hold this mountain without me now, you know that. Abigail looked up from the fire she'd built without thinking, the perfect thin air fire, small to big air underneath. Course I could, she said. That was the whole point, wasn't it? You said teach me till I don't need you nor Boyd nor any man alive. Well, I don't. She held his eyes across the fire. And that's exactly why I'm choosing to keep you, Caleb Morgan. Not because I need you. Because I don't. And I want you anyway. That's the only kind of choosing that's worth a damn. Anything else is just being scared of being alone, and I'm not scared of being alone anymore. This mountain cured me of that. A pause. You're not a thing I need. You're a thing I chose. There's a whole world of difference, and it took me 27 years and a broke leg yours to learn it. And Caleb Morgan, who had spent 10 years believing the best he could offer anyone was to walk away before he ruined them, understood at last that he had been chosen, not rescued into not settled for, but chosen by a woman who had every reason and every ability to choose otherwise, and it healed something in him no splint ever could. They came down the mountain in the fall. They came down together, 3 of them, Caleb on his cane, Abigail with the paper Hollis with his testimony, and they did not go to Red Hollow. They went to the territorial capital and past it to the federal courthouse, 2 days' ride beyond, because Abigail had never once forgotten what she'd said. In the dark of her father's house. Federal, not territory. Boyd owns the territory ones. The federal judge was a hard old man named Ambrose Sayer, who owed Harlan Boyd exactly nothing. He looked at the 1859 survey with the territorial stamp. He looked at the payment receipts in a dead man's Bible. He heard Hollis testify, pale and shaking and unflinching, to 5 paid killings and a plot to steal a valley's water. He heard Abigail Turner tell the whole of it in a voice that did not shake, from the 7 rejections to the fire in the street, to the house burned, to the storm, to the ravine. And when she was done, there was not a sound in that courtroom. And then Judge Ambrose Sayer did a thing that no one in the territory of Montana would have believed possible. He sent federal marshals to Red Hollow. They came into that town not as Boyd's bought men, but as the arm of a government Boyd could not buy. And they arrested Harlan Boyd in his own land office in front of the gold watch chain and the ledgers of his 4-year swindle. And they arrested Sheriff Dunmore too. But Dunmore, when they came for him, did a strange thing. He held out his hands for the irons, and he said loud enough for the street to hear, "It's about time. I've been carrying other men's paper for 20 years and I'm tired. Ask me anything. I'll tell you all of it." And he did. The tired, crooked sheriff who'd told Abigail to hold her survey tight became the second witness that buried Harlan Boyd, because it turned out a man can only carry so much paper before he wants at the end to set it down. The railroad was real. That came out at trial. Boyd had known for a year that the spur was coming, had known what the water would be worth, had spent 4 years and 7 false bridegrooms and 5 hired killers trying to get his hands on one piece of paper a burned girl kept under her floor. He got 20 years. He was not a young man. He would not come out. And the valley, the whole dry valley that had watched Abigail Turner get rejected 7 times and called her a problem, and agreed she couldn't hold her own ground. Learned that the burned girl they'd thrown away had held in her scarred hand the water rights to every acre of them. That every rancher who'd turned his face from her drew his water legally by her leave. That she could have shut them dry any day she chose. She didn't shut them dry. That was the thing. Red Hollow never got over the thing they talked about for a generation. Abigail Turner came back down the mountain holding the power to ruin every last one of them, and she used it to save them instead. She set the water rights fair and cheap and permanent in writing filed federal so that no Harlan Boyd could ever again hold a valley's throat. She gave the town the one thing the town had never once given her. Mercy it hadn't earned. Why? Pike asked her. Pike, the mercantile man whose boy Danny had ridden through the dark to save her life. Pike, who couldn't meet her eyes for 6 years, and now couldn't stop trying to. Why be good to us? After what we did. We'd have watched you starve, Miss Turner. Most of us. God forgive us, we'd have watched. Abigail Turner stood in the main street of Red Hollow, where 7 men had walked away from her, where she'd held up her burned hand to a town that decided she was nothing, and she gave Pike the truest answer she had. Because the whole sickness of this place, she said, was people deciding who was worth saving. Boyd just did it louder than the rest of you. And I could stand here and do the same thing. Back decide you're not worth water, decide you're not worth mercy, pay you back in your own coin. But then, I'd just be a Turner-shaped Boyd, wouldn't I? And the mountain didn't near kill me and give me back just so I could come down and be one more person deciding who deserves to live. She looked down the street at all of them, at the whole watching town. I'm not doing it for you. I never could have done it for you. I'm doing it because I finally know what I'm worth, and I won't spend it being small. That's all. That's the whole of it. She and Caleb were married that winter, not in Red Hollow's church under Reverend Doyle, who had counseled her removal to a home for unfortunate women, and who now could not look at her any better than Pike could. They were married up the mountain at the cabin by Judge Ambrose Sayer, who rode 2 days to do it and said it was the first wedding in 40 years on the bench he'd actually wanted to attend. Hollis stood as witness. Danny Pike carried the ring, and the whole valley below them lay green and living off water that a burned girl had chosen to let flow. On the morning of it, before the judge arrived, Caleb Morgan stood with Abigail at the edge of the ridge, looking down at the country that had tried so hard to erase them both, and he said the thing he'd been carrying since the ravine. You were never broken, he said. I want you to hear me say it plain one time so it's said. 7 men and a whole town looked at you and saw something broke. I looked at you and saw the strongest thing I ever met in my life, and I was right, and they were wrong, and you proved it on this mountain 100 times over. You were never broken, Abigail. Not once. Not for one day. And Abigail Turner looked at this man. The cold man who'd carried the nations up a mountain for 10 years, who'd stopped walking for a scarred hand in the street, who'd taught her to hold high country, and then let her haul him out of his own grave, and she gave him back the only words that were true enough to answer with. Neither were you, she said. He took her burned hand in his scarred one, held it the way he'd held it that first morning in the yard. Like a hand was a hand, like there was nothing to forgive in it, because there'd never been anything wrong with it at all. And the town below never called her a problem again. They never called her removed, never called her unfortunate, never called her broken. They called her by her name, and then by her married name, and in time they called her the woman who held the water and let it flow, the woman who came down off the mountain with the power to ruin them and chose to save them instead. But Abigail Morgan, who had been Abigail Turner, who had held up her burned hand to a whole town that decided she was nothing, and then walked up a mountain and become everything they swore she never could. She knew the truest name for what she was, and she'd earned every letter of it the hard way at the bottom of a ravine in the teeth of a storm in the street outside a mercantile with 7 men's backs turned to her. She was a survivor. She always had been. And the day she stopped hiding her hand was the day the whole world finally caught up to what she'd known deep down all along. That she was never the one who needed saving. She was the one who saved.